Story 1. The Hitchhiker. My name is Emma, and this happened last summer when my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the country. There were 5 of us, me, my boyfriend Sam, and our friends Mike, Rachel, and Jen. We were driving from New York to California, taking our time to enjoy the sights along the way. On the 3rd night, we were driving through a remote area in Arizona. The sun had set, and the only light came from our headlights and the occasional car passing by. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side, giving us an eerie sense of isolation. As we rounded a bend, we saw a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. It was a young woman, probably in her 20s, wearing a tattered dress and looking desperate. We hesitated, but Rachel insisted we stop and help her. We pulled over, and the woman approached the car. She had a haunted look in her eyes, and her voice was shaky as she asked for a ride to the nearest town. We made room for her in the back seat, and she introduced herself as Lily. As we drove, Lily told us she had been stranded after her car broke down. She seemed grateful but uneasy, constantly looking over her shoulder. We tried to make small talk, but her answers were short and vague. About an hour later, we reached a small town. We offered to drop her off at a motel, but she insisted on being left at a diner on the outskirts. We pulled into the parking lot, and as she got out, she turned to us with a pleading look in her eyes. "Please, be careful on this road. There's something out there," she said before disappearing into the diner. We exchanged uneasy glances, but shrugged it off as the ramblings of a distressed hitchhiker. We continued on our way, but the atmosphere in the car was tense. About 30 minutes later, we saw headlights behind us, approaching fast. The car swerved erratically, almost as if the driver was drunk. It sped past us, but as it did, we caught a glimpse of the driver. It was a man with wild eyes and a manic grin, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. We decided to keep driving and find a place to stop for the night. However, a few miles down the road, we saw the same car pulled over to the side, hazard lights blinking. The driver was nowhere to be seen, but there were signs of a struggle. The driver's door was open, and there were scratch marks on the side of the car. We didn't stop. We kept driving, hearts pounding, until we reached a motel several miles away. We checked in and locked ourselves in our rooms, too scared to sleep. The next morning, we reported the incident to the local authorities. They told us there had been several reports of a dangerous hitchhiker in the area, and they were searching for him. They advised us to stay vigilant and avoid picking up strangers. We continued our trip, but the encounter haunted us. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and every time we saw a car approaching, our hearts would race. We never found out what happened to Lily or the man in the car, but the memory of that night stayed with us. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk on deserted roads and the strangers we encounter. Sometimes, the people who need help the most are the ones we should be most wary of. Abandoned motel. My name is Jake, and last fall, my girlfriend, Lisa, and I decided to take a road trip through the southwestern United States. We planned to visit national parks, enjoy the scenery, and camp under the stars. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a break from our busy lives. One evening, we found ourselves driving through a desolate stretch of highway in New Mexico. The sun was setting, and we were exhausted from a long day of hiking. We hadn't seen another car for hours, and our GPS was spotty at best. We decided to find a place to stay for the night. As we drove, we saw a sign for a motel up ahead. The letters were faded, and the sign looked like it hadn't been maintained in years, but we were desperate for rest. We pulled into the gravel driveway and saw the motel was in a state of disrepair. The parking lot was empty, and the building looked abandoned. Despite the eerie atmosphere, we decided to check it out. We walked into the lobby, which was dimly lit and covered in dust. A bell sat on the counter, so I rang it, and a moment later, an elderly man appeared from the back room. He had a vacant look in his eyes and moved slowly, as if in a trance. "Need a room?" he asked in a monotone voice. "Yes, please," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He handed us a key without any formalities and pointed us to room number 7. We walked down the dim hallway, the old carpet muffling our footsteps. The room was small and musty, with outdated furniture and a flickering light bulb, but we were too tired to care and decided to make the best of it. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The entire place felt wrong, like it was frozen in time. Lisa tried to reassure me, but she was clearly uneasy as well. We went to bed early, hoping to get a good night's sleep. But around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside our door. They were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. I held my breath, listening intently. The footsteps stopped, and I heard a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. I nudged Lisa awake, and we both listened in silence. The footsteps resumed, this time moving down the hallway. I gathered my courage and opened the door a crack, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with a sense of dread. We decided we couldn't stay there any longer. We packed our bags in a hurry and left the room. As we walked down the hallway, we heard the footsteps again, this time coming from behind us. We turned around, but there was no one there. We reached the lobby and saw the old man sitting behind the counter, staring blankly into space. He didn't react as we left the key on the counter and rushed out the door. We got into the car and drove away as fast as we could. Once we were back on the highway, we finally breathed a sigh of relief. We spent the rest of the night in the car, too scared to look for another motel. The next morning, we decided to stop at a diner to grab some breakfast and gather our thoughts. We told the waitress about our experience, and she looked at us with wide eyes. "That motel's been abandoned for years," she said. "People say it's haunted by the spirits of the guests who disappeared there. You were lucky to get out." The realization sent chills down our spines. We had spent the night in a place haunted by restless spirits, and we had narrowly escaped whatever fate had befallen the previous guests. We continued our road trip, but the memory of that night stayed with us. The abandoned motel was a stark reminder that some places are better left alone, and that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are very real.
Story 3: The Phantom Truck. My name is Laura, and last spring, my friends and I decided to take a road trip to the Grand Canyon. There were 4 of us, me, my boyfriend Tom, and our friends Katie and Chris. We were all excited about the trip and eager to explore the natural wonders along the way. On the second night, we were driving through a remote stretch of highway in Nevada. The road was empty, and the desert landscape was bathed in moonlight. We were chatting and laughing, enjoying the drive, when we noticed a pair of headlights in the distance, coming up behind us fast. At first, we didn't think much of it. But as the truck got closer, it started to flash its high beams at us. Tom, who was driving, pulled over to let the truck pass, but instead of passing, it pulled over behind us. "What's this guy's problem?" Tom muttered, looking at the rearview mirror. We sat there, waiting for the truck to move, but it didn't. The headlights were blinding, and we couldn't see the driver. After a few minutes, Tom decided to get out and see what was going on. "Be careful," I said, my stomach nodding with anxiety. Tom got out and walked towards the truck. Suddenly, the engine roared to life, and the truck sped off into the night, kicking up a cloud of dust. Tom stood there, confused, before getting back into the car. "That was weird," he said, shaking his head. "Let's just keep going." We continued our drive, but the encounter left us all on edge. We kept an eye out for the truck, but it seemed to have disappeared. About an hour later, we saw the headlights again, this time in the distance behind us. The truck was back, and it was coming up fast. Tom accelerated, hoping to lose it, but the truck matched our speed. It started flashing its high beams again, and this time, it swerved from side to side, trying to force us off the road. "What does this guy want?" Katie cried, her voice filled with fear. Tom floored the gas pedal, and we raced down the highway, the truck right on our tail. We took a sharp turn onto a dirt road, hoping to lose it in the darkness. The truck followed, its headlights bouncing wildly. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the truck never far behind. Finally, we saw a small, abandoned gas station up ahead. Tom pulled in, and we jumped out of the car, looking for a place to hide. We ran behind the building and crouched down, hearts pounding. The truck pulled into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the area. We held our breath, praying it wouldn't find us. After a few tense minutes, the truck turned off its headlights and the engine. We waited in silence, straining to hear any sound. Suddenly, we heard footsteps approaching. "Who's there?" a voice called out, deep and menacing. We stayed hidden, too scared to move. The footsteps came closer, and we could see the silhouette of a man in the moonlight. He walked around the gas station, his boots crunching on the gravel. Just when we thought he would find us, the footsteps stopped. We peeked around the corner and saw the man standing by the truck, looking around. After what felt like an eternity, he got back into the truck and drove away. We waited for a while to make sure he was gone before coming out of hiding. Shaken and exhausted, we got back into the car and continued our journey. We didn't see the truck again, but the fear lingered. When we finally reached the Grand Canyon, we tried to put the experience behind us. But the memory of that night stayed with us, a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we were on the open road. We never found out who the driver was or why he had targeted us. But the encounter left us deeply shaken and more cautious about who we share the road with. The creepy campsite. My name is Daniel, and last summer, my girlfriend, Megan, and I decided to take a road trip through the Pacific Northwest. We both love the outdoors and plan to camp in various national parks along the way. One evening, we found a secluded campsite deep in the woods. It was perfect, quiet, surrounded by trees, and far from any signs of civilization. We set up our tent, built a fire, and settled in for a peaceful night under the stars. As the sun set, the woods grew darker and more ominous. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. We were enjoying the tranquility when we heard a distant howl. It was faint at first, but it gradually grew louder and more guttural. "Probably just a coyote," I said, trying to reassure Megan. But as the howling continued, it started to sound more human. It was a chilling, mournful wail that sent shivers down our spines. We exchanged uneasy glances, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. Around midnight, the howling stopped, and the woods fell silent. We decided to call it a night and climbed into our tent. Just as we were drifting off to sleep, we heard footsteps approaching our campsite. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel path. "Did you hear that?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart racing. I grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent, shining the light outside. The beam landed on a figure standing at the edge of our campsite. It was a man, tall and thin, with wild eyes and disheveled hair. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to sound calm. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us with a blank expression. Megan grabbed my arm, and we both backed away from the tent entrance. After what felt like an eternity, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods. We waited for a while, listening for any sign of him returning. When we were sure he was gone, we quickly packed up our belongings and decided to leave. As we were packing, we heard the howling again, this time much closer. It was accompanied by the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling. Panic set in, and we hurried to get everything into the car. We drove away, hearts pounding, and didn't stop until we reached a well-lit rest area miles away. We sat in the car, trying to make sense of what had happened. The next morning, we decided to report the incident to the park rangers. They listened to our story and assured us they would investigate. But they also warned us that the area had a history of strange occurrences and that we should be careful when camping in remote locations. We continued our trip but stayed in more populated campsites from then on. The memory of that night haunted us, a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the wilderness. To this day, I don't know who the man was or what he wanted. But the encounter left us deeply shaken and more cautious about where we camp. The woods, once a place of peace and beauty, had become a source of fear and uncertainty.
Story 5: The Vanishing Town. My name is Sarah, and a few years ago, my friends and I decided to take a road trip through the Midwest. We were looking for adventure and decided to take a less traveled route, hoping to find hidden gems along the way. One afternoon, we were driving through Kansas when we saw a sign for a town called Silent Hill. None of us had heard of it before, but we decided to check it out. The road leading to the town was narrow and winding, surrounded by dense forests. As we approached the town, we noticed that everything seemed unusually quiet. There were no cars, no people, and the buildings looked old and abandoned. We parked the car and decided to explore on foot. The town had an eerie feel to it, as if it had been frozen in time. The streets were empty, and the shops and houses were in various states of decay. We walked around, calling out, but there was no response. We decided to check out the town hall, hoping to find some answers. The door was unlocked, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark and dusty, with old furniture and papers scattered around. It looked like no one had been there for years. As we explored, we found a newspaper on a desk dated 1952. The headline read, "Town Evacuated After Mysterious Disappearances." We exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that we were in a ghost town. Suddenly, we heard footsteps coming from upstairs. We froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder. They were slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty building. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, but the footsteps continued. We decided to investigate, climbing the creaky staircase. As we reached the top, the footsteps stopped. We looked around, but there was no one there. We searched the rooms, but they were all empty. Just as we were about to head back downstairs, we heard a door slam shut. We ran to the source of the sound and found a small office with a locked door. "Maybe someone is trapped inside," my friend Mark suggested. We tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and we could see our breath. A cold, oppressive feeling settled over us, and we knew we had to leave. We hurried down the stairs and out of the building, running back to the car. As we drove away, we noticed that the town seemed to be disappearing in the rearview mirror. The buildings faded into the mist, and the road behind us seemed to vanish. We didn't stop driving until we reached a larger town miles away. We were all shaken, trying to make sense of what had happened. We decided to do some research and discovered that Silent Hill had been abandoned in the 1950s after a series of mysterious disappearances. The town was rumored to be haunted, and people were advised to stay away. We realized we had stumbled upon a place trapped between worlds, where the past and present collided. The experience left us deeply unsettled, and we vowed never to take unexplored routes again. To this day, I still think about that town and the eerie feeling that enveloped us. The memory of Silent Hill serves as a reminder that some places are better left undiscovered, and that the past can sometimes reach out and touch the present in ways we can't explain.